I am James from Analog Cycles. This is the first in a series of videos we're going to do on sort of basic how-to stuff. Some of it will pertain directly to stuff that we make, like the Discord Creemee aluminum stem. Some of it will be more general, like how to install a ratio derailleur cage. But today we're going to start with one of our earliest products, which is this aluminum machine stem. It's made up in Maine, anodized there as well, and it was designed by us at Analog and Tanglefoot, and our friend Ian, who runs Ignite Components in New Jersey. It's pretty cool little zero extension stem. I think still pretty much the only one on the market right now. There are a couple tricks to installing it. We'll go over those today. First thing you want to do is get your bike in a work stand. You don't have to have a work stand for really anything that we're going to do, but if you have one or a way to hang your bike, even if it's just like a rope that you hang from your garage, it is just easier to have the bike at eye level, and certainly for demonstration purposes, it's easier than like me hamburgering it on the ground. So get your bike up on a stand. First thing you want to do is secure the wheel so that the headset and the fork doesn't just fall apart here. Belay straps work well for that. Piece of twine, whatever. You want to get it as tight as possible so that the headset is actually compressed to a certain extent, and not just like jangling around on there. It's just going to make your job measuring wise easier in a minute or two. So you gather your tools, gather the parts, stem itself, a M6 preload bolt to preload the stem and the headset, and then I just have a 4 and a 5 millimeter Allen key, and a preset torque wrench with a 4 millimeter Allen key in there. And these are like, if you can't afford a full bore torque wrench, this is a great setup. It's got 4 or 5 preset torque settings on it that are easy to change, and you can get these affordable little bits for like 4 millimeter, 5 millimeter, 6 millimeter bits in there. And then the last two things I have are some calipers. If you don't have calipers, you can use a decent like metal tape measure or a metal ruler. I wouldn't really rely on a wooden ruler for this, but the best thing you could do would be get an affordable set of calipers. Unior makes a set that we like that are really not that expensive. The very last thing is assembly grease. You can use virtually any grease. We like the crystal grease from White Lightning because it's clear, but there's Park, whatever, it doesn't really matter what grease you use. Okay, so that's the tools. Got the wheel secure. Next thing we want to do is measure the depth of the inside of the stem, because there's a shelf inside of the stem that sort of acts like a headset top cap, so you can preload the stem. So we need to measure that depth. I know what it is, but you should just do it at home just to do it. So you stick the depth side of the calipers in there. All right, and then we have 51 millimeters, and that number is super important because it's how it pertains to how much steer tube you can have exposed on the bike. You really want 50 millimeters, not 51 millimeters, but 50 millimeters, pretty much on the nose. 49 is okay, but any less than that, you would want to remove a spacer to get more penetration. And if you have 51 millimeters of steer tube or 50.75, you're going to find that when you preload the stem onto the steer tube, that you're going to run out of play. You're going to hit that shelf in there, and the headset's going to be loose. So you really want to make sure that when you measure this next section, that it's nailed right on 50 millimeters. So to get that measurement right, I'm pulling up on the fork crown and pinching it so that I'm shoving the fork crown up into the steer tube, and then we're going to measure this guy over here. See what this comes out to. So right now, this is 50 millimeters exactly. If it wasn't, you'd want to use small spacers to fine tune the height here to get this exposed section of steer tube exactly to to 50 millimeters, or as close as you possibly can. That is one of the quirks with the stem. It's really not as hard as maybe it sounds. If you have a handful of 1 and 2 millimeter spacers, you can easily nail that dimension. Okay, now before we install this guy, we're going to grease all the bolts. And at this point, hopefully Dan will employ internet magic to make this part go faster. Alright, so when I'm reinstalling these bolts, I'm not tightening them. I'm just taking up most of the length of the bolt, but they're not snug or anything. And when I'm greasing them, I'm just putting like a little smear on one, and then kind of transferring it to another one, and then doing the same. You don't need a lot of grease, but you do want a little bit of grease. All right, now we're gonna leave the faceplate of the stem off for right now, because our next thing that we're gonna do is double check and make sure that that we have the right length here, even when there's compression here. So generally, if your star nut is installed to the correct depth, like if you've used a Park tool or a Uni or star nut setter, then your star nut's sort of automatically at the right depth, and this length bolt will work. This is an M6 bolt with a washer. So this is a 35 millimeter bolt with a standard stainless washer on it. You're also going to want to grease this guy and drop that guy down in there. And you know you have the right length bolt. We'll do a close-up on this hopefully in a second, but if the top of the bolt, when you drop it in there, if it doesn't actually go all the way in, you want maybe 5 millimeters or so to tighten that thing down into the star nut. 10 millimeters is fine. But what you don't want is, like, if you drop this bolt in and the bolt's sticking way up here, or if you drop it in and it just bottoms out on the stem, the bolt's too short, you do need some bite into that star nut. So again, holding the bottom of the fork crown up, pulling that up, pinching right here. I'm just gonna lightly snug this preload bolt. And I've been doing this for so long, it's hard to sort of tell someone how snug this should be, but you go until it stops easily spinning, and then just maybe a quarter turn after that, when that bolt starts to bite a little bit into that star nut, and you're actually pulling the fork up with the force of this bolt. Just that little bit of a snug is what you're looking for usually, and we can check that most easily later on when we have the bars installed. But you could, if you wanted to at this point, if you're worried about it, take the bike down, turn the front wheel sideways, and grab the stem around the steer tube and around the top of the headset and rock the fork back and forth. And if you feel like there's movement happening in the headset at that point, then you maybe need to tighten this guy a little more. Conversely, if it feels really stiff when you go to turn the handlebars or turn the wheel, then you've put too much torque on that thing. You're really just barely snugging that to put tension on these two bearings in here. Okay, so we got that preload set up, feels good, and the next thing we want to do is put the handlebars on. And the reason we want to put the bars on next is if you went immediately and tightened these side bolts, the stem would be crooked, you'd have no way to straighten it. You got to put the bars on, then straighten it, and then we'll do these side guys. So besides like the little bit of measuring you have to do with this stem, the only other thing you really need to pay attention to is when you're putting this faceplate on, this stem is machined, it's not cold forged, it's not steel. Machine stems are, of all the stems, they are potentially the most fragile. Now, these stems, we've set them up, they're designed so that they can actually take double their recommended torque rating in terms of tightening these bolts down. But if you go ham-fisted on this thing, and you don't use a torque wrench, and you really crank on these bolts like they're a seat post bolt or something like that, you will crack the faceplate. It's just going to happen. It's not a design flaw. It is you not installing it correctly. And so you always want to follow a couple rules. One is use a torque wrench. Two, when you are tightening the stem, there's a gap between the stem and the faceplate. You want to make sure that that gap is even. If one side is closed and one side is open, you are going to create a stress riser in the stem. This goes for any stem, not just this aluminum stem, but any brand of stem. You're going to create a stress riser. You're going to have more stress on the side that's it's snugged in there, and that can create a stem crack. So what you want to do when you're tightening a stem, especially a 4-bolt stem, is work sort of in a star pattern. So 1 bolt, 2 bolt, 3 bolt, 4 bolt, 1 bolt, 2 bolt, 3 bolt, 4 bolt, and bring these guys down. So because I've been yakking to you, it's not even. So we're just gonna get these guys even real quick, and then we'll start to snug again. All right, so right now, a couple things are obviously askew. The bars are all droopy town, and this would be a good point before this gets too tight to make sure that this is straight. That you're aligned in terms of left and right with your handlebars. A lot of them have guide markings. If they don't, just try to use your eyeballs as best as possible. Okay, so these are not tight yet. What we're going to do next is put the bike on the ground and set the drop bars up to their right tilt, and then while the bike's on the ground, we will snug these bolts down. Okay, so on the ground here, usually I would be back a little bit from the bike and sort of eyeballing this, but what we're looking for is a setup where in which the ramp of the bar, which is this part of the bar, that you want either level or tilted down just slightly, and then the hood here tilting up at about a 12-degree angle. And what that does is that makes like a shallow valley, like a pocket for your hand to be in that's super comfortable. I see a lot of people put drop bars, dirt drop set up so that the ramp and the hood are flush, which puts the hood like somewhere, the top of the hood somewhere down here. And I don't know why exactly people do that, but they do. It's not correct, and it's not comfortable. You have like a crazy reach situation. This is a nice short reach, makes it easy to grab the brake lever from the drop. And this shallow valley makes it really comfortable. Right now these hoods are already set up, but if we were setting this up from scratch, that shallow valley, we'll get into that in another video, but that's what you'd want to look for. So I can't tell if this is exactly good. Does this look pretty good? Up more? Yeah, all right. Okay, so now at this point, I'm going to break out the torque wrench and snug all these bolts down. And again, I'm working in a star pattern. I have the torque wrench preset to 5 Newton meters, and I have a 4mm hex key in there. So I'm just going to go around. It's going to click when I get up to torque. And I'm just going in little increments here. It's way better to go in like small adjustments than to just kind of really honk on one bolt and slowly work up to that torque setting. So I go around every bolt. I want to do it once, make sure I get that positive click, and then the stem actually sort of settles in, the faceplate kind of settles in a little bit, and often you actually need to go back and do them once more. So you got those 8 positive clicks, you're set. You got 5 Newton meters. That's more than enough clamping power to hold a bar in place for any style of riding if it's a 4-bolt faceplate set up there. All right, now we're going to do a couple things, but we're going to tighten these side bolts, and we're going to check and make sure my preload setting was correct for the stem. These side bolts, if you're going to use a torque wrench on them, which you're welcome to do, you can do 7 Newton meters for these. That's a pretty high torque setting, and you really can just use a standard tool to tighten those without worrying about the torque spec. This is a really meaty part of the stem. And I'm not saying you should just go hog wild on it, because you shouldn't, but you can absolutely kind of crank down on those guys. So again, I'm working top, bottom, top, bottom, top, bottom, and I didn't straighten stem, so I'm gonna undo it real quick. Should have done that. So there are really fancy tools to straighten the stem, but I think you can do a pretty darn good job with drywall. And if you can't notice it under a controlled workshop environment, you're really not going to worry about it out on the trail. All right, so we're pretty straight there. All right, so now as I'm tightening, you notice I'm not holding this thing at the very end of its lever. The further back you get on this tool toward its end, the more leverage you're applying. You don't need to go crazy on these bolts, and so don't like go back here and just really yank on this thing. You're not like securing an ocean liner or something. It's a stem that doesn't need that much force. So I'm going till that bolt bites. It's snug, and it's good. Now, to check the preload, to definitively check the preload, make sure everything's set up properly. Get rid of this belay strap, and I see a lot of people checking headset preload like this. They grab the front brake lever and they hold the headset and they rock the bike back and forth, and man, it feels like crap. And the reason it feels like crap is that all disc brakes, even the very best ones, the pads are not perfectly seated inside of the brake. And this is the same for rim brakes too. Like the rim brakes have play in the bushing or the bearing at the pivot. So when you grab the front brake and rock back and forth, you are going to have a knocking that maybe is going to feel like the headset's loose, and that is not how you do it. You want to turn the wheel sideways, and then you grab the brake. When you grab the brake doing this, those brake pads aren't going to rock back and forth, so you're not going to get like a false sense of what's happening with the bike. You're really isolating the preload setting in the headset. So grab the headset front to back lightly. You're not like trying to hold it in place. You're trying to feel for play. Grab that brake lever, rock it. In this case, there's nothing. If there was a rock in there, you would undo the faceplate, undo these side bolts, tighten that top bolt a little bit more, then sort of go back into it. The other thing you want to check for is just too much preload, and I don't have a lot of room in this janky studio we have, but you can throw us on a stool right here, and there wasn't this thing looming over me. You could just pick up the front wheel and just easily sort of move the wheel back and forth. It should flow freely. If it's binding, if it feels sticky, if the steering feels slow, you have too much preload, you gotta go in there and back it off. All right, so that is how you install a Discord Creemee stem. I don't know if there's anything else to talk about. The only other thing that I always recommend when you're doing this kind of work is just double check your bolts, even just like as a, I don't know, I guess this is like a safety thing. I would just go back in, just are these things, did these things actually bite? Did I skip something? Did I forget something? Before you go ride, just check them. And it's just a good, just general safety thing. That's it. Thanks.